The chapel stood quiet on the edge of Wolf's Hollow, wind snagging its broken eaves and carrying dust through the brittle grass. Sunlight slanted through stained glass and faded hues, casting washed-out saints across the pews. It wasn't a wedding for celebration, only resolution. No flowers, no music, just a scrape of boots, the rustle of fabric, and the solemn silence of people pretending this meant something more than convenience. Colt Thatcher stood near the altar, shoulders square beneath his worn black coat, his hat held tight in both hands like a shield. His face, all angles and scars, betrayed nothing, but inside he felt the weight of 100 steps that had led him here, none of which he'd chosen. The war had left him with a limp and a reputation. Wolf's Hollow wanted both tucked away behind a fence and a marriage. Redemption through duty. That's what they called it. She entered alone. Marin Calloway moved like she was walking through a fire only she could see. Her white dress was simple, homespun, borrowed. She didn't wear a veil. Her hair, dark as dusk, was braided down her back with no adornments. Her chin was high, though her eyes flickered as they met his, not with fear, but something more dangerous. Resentment laced with resolve. The preacher cleared his throat, thin voice echoing too loud in the small room. He rushed the vows, the way men do when guilt and haste dance together. There were no guests, only witnesses. Judge Toller, who'd signed the paper, Miss Beatrice from the seamstress shop, who looked everywhere but at Marin, and the sheriff, arms crossed, as if waiting for a reason to intervene. Colt repeated his lines with a flatness that betrayed their hollowness. Marin's voice, by contrast, rang clear, calm but sharp, like a blade drawn slowly. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, the wind moaned to the warped window pane. No one spoke. When their hands touched, it was brief. Marin's grip tightened just slightly, deliberate, unflinching. She wasn't here for romance. She was here to survive. The moment passed, and suddenly they were married. Outside, the air had grown colder, the clouds dragging low and heavy over the hills. They walked in silence to the wagon, waiting just beyond the chapel. Colt offered his hand to help her up, but she climbed without it. The horse snorted, shifting against the reins, eager to leave. The road out of town stretched wide and barren, the hills wrapped in frost. They rode without words, the clatter of wheels louder than breath. Colt stared straight ahead. Marin's gaze drifted toward the passing trees, her thoughts unreadable. Her hands clutched the edge of her skirt, knuckles pale. "You don't have to talk," she said finally, voice soft but sharp. "But don't act like I'm something you were forced to drag home." Colt blinked but didn't turn. "You weren't." "Weren't what?" "Dragged," he said. "You walked it on your own." A long pause settled between them, full of words neither wanted to touch. The air smelled of distant wood smoke and frozen earth. Marin exhaled, then pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I didn't burn the church," she said. "I didn't say you did." "No," she murmured. "But you didn't say I didn't either." The road curved near the ridge, revealing the outline of Thatcher Ranch, a small house pressed against the horizon, dark timbered and wind-bitten. The barn leaned slightly, and the fence was missing 3 posts. It looked like a place that remembered better days, and didn't expect more to come. They arrived just as snow began to fall, light and listless. Colt tied the horse, then walked around and opened the door for her. This time, Marin accepted his help, her fingers cold against his palm. He noticed a tremble in them, but said nothing. Inside, the house was clean but bare. A fire burned low in the hearth. A single photograph hung on the wall, a young boy in uniform, and beside him, a girl with a bright smile and Colt's same eyes. Marin stared a moment too long before turning away. Colt gestured to the smaller room down the hall. "You can take that one." She nodded and disappeared into it, without a word. He stood there a while, staring at the door she closed between them. Later that night, he found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, wiping down a counter that didn't need cleaning. Her hair was loose now, curls damp near her temples. She didn't look up when he entered. "You don't owe them anything," he said. Marin stopped moving, cloth frozen in her hand. "They think you'll fix something for them," he continued. "But you don't have to." She turned slowly. You think I'm here to fix your name? I think you're here to survive, Colt said. Her eyes searched his, steady, unsure, proud. Then let me. They stood like that, a single oil lamp flickering between them, shadows dancing across wood and bone. Outside, the snow thickened, burying tracks and fences alike. That night, as Colt lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he listened for the sound of her moving in the next room. She didn't, or perhaps she was just too quiet to hear. But in the silence, something shifted, not loudly, not visibly, just a small unraveling of the space between them, as if a boundary had been drawn not to keep them apart, but to measure how far they'd have to cross. And when the wind slipped beneath the door and rattled the windows, it sounded like a question neither of them knew how to answer yet. The house woke slowly to the sound of snow sliding off its eaves. Cold light pushed through the lace curtains, casting quiet onto the floorboards, where dust settled like old secrets. Marin rose before the frost melted from the windows. She moved through the unfamiliar room with careful hands, as though even the air might splinter if touched too hard. The bed had creaked under her weight all night, and used the strangers. Everything in this place felt paused mid-breath, waiting. She dressed in silence and crept through the hall, following the faint scent of cedar smoke. The main room was warm but dim, and the fire from the night before had slumped into embers. She fed it gently, crouched low, breath misting as she coaxed flame from memory. Behind her, the house shifted, beams settling like bones. Colt's boots echoed against the porch a moment later. He entered with his coat dusted in snow, face red from wind, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. He paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the fire, the kettle she'd set to boil, her stillness. You didn't have to get up, he said. Marin looked over her shoulder. Didn't plan to sleep in a stranger's house like a guest. You're not a guest, he replied. You're here. She rose, brushing her hands on her skirt, not sure if that was comfort or warning. He poured water into the basin and began washing without asking for privacy. She didn't look away. He moved like someone used to being seen and ignored all the same. Later, she swept the floors. He patched a corner of the roof. Words were few, but glances spoke louder than absence. In those hours, they circled one another, not like predators, but like two people raised among land too wide to trust what stood still. By midday, she'd found a cupboard full of cracked dishes and jars of beans. She cooked without asking, not from duty but out of the strange ache of shared silence. When Colt returned from the field, sweat clinging to his collar, the table was set with cornbread and stew. He paused, hat in hand. You didn't have to. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. You said I wasn't a guest. They ate with the kind of quiet that fills chapels before vows. Not awkward, just deliberate. Every spoonful was a decision not to run. Outside, wind swept through brittle grass and rattled the barn doors. Inside, time moved differently, slower, wiser. At one point, Colt stood and replaced the kettle on the stove before she could. It was a small thing, but something shifted in his shoulders when she let him. That evening, she walked out to the edge of the pasture. The sky was lavender and rust, bleeding into dusk. Colts grazed near the fence line, tail swishing at nothing. She leaned against a weathered post and breathed deep, air so cold it bit her lungs, but cleaner than anything she'd known in town. Colt joined her after a while, silent at first. His presence didn't startle her. Fence needs mending, he said, nodding toward the sagging north line. She didn't answer. Her eyes followed the horizon like it might carry her forward if she stared long enough. Was this your father's place? She asked. He shook his head. Built it myself, after the war. And the photo in the hall? My sister, he said, Cassie, died the same year I came back. Marin's jaw tightened. The war takes more after it ends. He looked at her then, not the way a man sizes up danger, but the way someone notices pain wearing new face. You've known loss, he said. She swallowed. Loss is the only thing the town gave freely. The wind picked up. A hawk cried far off. Neither moved. That night, she found him seated near the fire, thumbing a leather-bound journal, without opening it. His face looked softer in the firelight, less carved. She hesitated at the threshold of the room. He didn't look up. "They think I'll ruin you," she said. "I've already been ruined," he replied. She stepped closer. "They think I'll shame you." He closed the journal. "I don't care what they think." Silence wrapped the room. Marin walked past him toward the hearth, reached down and stoked the flame higher. Her fingers hovered in the warmth. Behind her, Colt's breath caught, soft, barely there. "You know what they don't say?" she asked, voice low. "What's that?" "That maybe I was never ruined to begin with." He stood, slow, every movement deliberate. "Maybe they were afraid you weren't." Their eyes met, not with heat, but with the recognition of something fragile being offered. She turned and walked toward the bedroom. At the door, she paused and looked back. "You're not the man they warned me about," she said. Colt's voice was nearly a whisper. "And you're not the woman they accuse you of being." She lingered a moment longer, then disappeared into the room. The door remained slightly ajar. Colt stared at it for a long while, the fire warming one side of his face, the other lit only by shadows. The wind outside lifted again, tapping against the window like fingers testing the glass. He didn't move, but neither did he sleep. The fire had burned low again, its glow flickering across the pinewood walls like breath that couldn't decide whether to stay or go. Outside, the snow thickened in the dark, settling over the pasture in silence. Marin stood barefoot on the kitchen planks, the hem of her nightdress brushing her ankles. Her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea she hadn't touched. She wasn't cold, but her body held itself like a question. Behind her, Colt moved. She didn't hear his steps, only the gentle creak of the floorboard near the hearth. He wasn't wearing boots. That detail struck her before she turned. He stopped in the threshold, still half in shadow, his shirt loose, hair damp from washing. His presence didn't fill the room. It watched, waited, like he was afraid to ask for space he hadn't earned. "You couldn't sleep," she said softly. "Didn't try." Her eyes flicked to the fire. "Because of me?" He stepped in, slow. "Because of everything." The room was quiet. The house listened. Even the wind seemed to pause against the windows, unsure if it should interrupt. "I used to think marriage was a mercy," she said, "a way to belong, until they used it to bury me alive." Colt's jaw worked, a muscle flickering in restraint. "You're not buried." She looked at him now, really looked. "Then tell me what I am." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a blanket from the back of the chair and held it out to her. Not like a gesture of ownership, but offering. She took it, wrapped it around her shoulders, though the tea had already warmed her hands. "You're here," he said, voice like gravel warmed by time. "You didn't run." "I thought about it. I wouldn't have chased you." She nodded, almost smiled. "But you would have noticed." They were closer now, without trying. The space between them was filled with breath and firelight, the quiet kind that doesn't ask for permission. "Did they threaten you?" she asked suddenly. "The town, I mean, to marry me." Colt met her gaze. "They didn't need to." She blinked. "So you wanted to?" "No." He stepped closer, hands at his sides. "I just didn't want to be the man who said no to you." She stared at him, waiting for the sting, but none came. He meant it plainly, not as confession, not as apology, just truth. "I didn't want to be saved," she whispered. "I wanted to be chosen." He reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers barely touched her skin, but the gesture landed like a promise. "You were," he said. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. The walls didn't close in. The silence didn't accuse. For once, she didn't feel like a headline in someone else's story. She stepped toward him then, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders. It pulled at her feet, like the past being set down gently. Colt's eyes never left hers. "I don't want this to be owed," she said. "It's not. I need to know that I have a choice." "You do," he said. "But so do I." They stood at the edge of something that couldn't be rushed. Neither of them reached to close the distance, but it happened anyway. Their hands met first, palms brushing, then fingers folding into a tentative, unfamiliar grip. He didn't kiss her. She didn't ask. Instead, Marin leaned into his chest, resting her forehead against the place just above his heart. He held her carefully, like she was still choosing. Like he was too. Time passed that way, without measure, without demand. Later, when the house had gone completely quiet and the fire began to nod off into embers, she led him down the hall. She didn't look back to see if he followed. She didn't need to. In the bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, lit by moonlight pooling through the thin curtain. Her eyes held as steady, and without a word, she climbed into the center of the bed, not to invite but to claim. When Colt stepped inside, he didn't hesitate. He removed his shirt, slowly, not to display himself, but to lay something down. The past, the silence, the apology no one asked for. She reached out, took his hand, and guided him beside her. In the stillness, their bodies met, not with urgency, but with reverence. No vows, no expectations, just a soft discovery of warmth where there hadn't been any before. She kissed him once, lightly, then again, deeper. He returned it, not hungrily, but wholly, as though he'd never kissed someone who wanted it for themselves. And when she moved on top of him, it wasn't seduction. It was ownership of her name, of her body, of her right to exist in a life not given to her, but claimed. Colt didn't fight it. He didn't guide. He let her lead, and in that quiet surrender, something between them stitched shut. When it was over, she lay against his chest, their legs tangled, skin cooling in the night air. "You never asked what they said about me," she murmured. "I didn't have to," he replied. "You told me everything that mattered." Outside, the wind stirred again, gently this time, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to resume. And somewhere beneath it, a horse let out a low, uneasy sound, like it had seen something moving out where the pasture met the trees.